Hey scholars, this is your PowerPoint video lecture for Chapter 3 in our argumentation book. Chapter 3 is on argument theories, models, and definitions. I highly recommend that you follow along in the PowerPoint presentation with this lecture video to simulate the classroom experiences. That's the way I'm doing things, right? So be looking at the PowerPoint as I'm talking through this lecture because that's what I'm doing. I'm looking at the same exact PowerPoint that's available to you. So chapter 3 is all about argument theories and models and definitions. It's uh, a chapter that's further helping you to understand the nature of argument. So let's start with the definition on that first slide, or the second slide, slide 2. I'm referencing page 38, the first page of the textbook. Sorry, the first page of the chapter. The authors write, at its most basic, argumentation is a form of communication that emphasizes reason giving. An argument may include emotional appeal, such as pity, guilt, or fear, but the defining feature of argument is that a person is advancing an idea or position through reasoning. That's kind of the focus of this chapter, the focus of this book, the whole course is how to reason with people. It's not just my opinion, right? I'm not just asserting my opinion, but I'm using reasoning, and it's more of an art than a science. It's not a dichotomous thing like this is how you do it. There's no other way around it. Um, and sometimes, as the authors mentioned, sometimes people have bad reasoning. Nevertheless, it's reasoning. And in their own mind, they're providing a reason for why they did something. In your mind, you're thinking that doesn't make any sense. Well, to them, it makes sense. And to argumentation experts, it's reasoning. It's just bad reasoning, right? Um, you make an assertion, you provide reasons. You try to change someone's mind using reasons. You try to persuade a friend to stop doing something or to begin doing something using reasons. Because anytime you're trying to modify behavior or attitudes, oftentimes you're going to get a counter argument or at least a response. Why? Why should I do that? Well, you don't want to just say, well, just because that's not a good reason. It's not really a reason. It's like a pseudo reason. So that's how we get our points across. That's how we get people to understand where we're coming from, ultimately to persuade others, to not just to get people to think the way that we think, but to provide a logical and reasonable explanation for why I believe X causes Y, or whatever the case may be. Um, so why is there so much emphasis on giving reasons? Slide 3, if someone attempts to persuade you and you ask why, if they just say, well, just because, or just trust me, right? And I'm sure you've done that before, where either you're the one who has said, just because, or just trust me, just do this and just trust me, it's going to work, or don't ask questions. And a lot of us, and hey, that might work for you, but that doesn't mean that it's good. Just because you might think, hey, I'm good at persuading people, and when they ask me why, I say, like, yeah, just trust me, and people trust me. That doesn't mean that it's a good argument. It just means that people are choosing not to question you know, your request or whatever it is you're trying to get someone to do. So a lot of us don't want to just follow someone's opinion. Just do this, just do that. Well, I don't want to just follow your opinion. So why so much emphasis on giving reasons? I have a poem that hopefully will help you to remember the nature of opinion. So slide 4. The title of this poem is Only My Opinion, and I probably should have put the author in there. I can't think of that. I think it's Monica Shannon. Anyhow, a fairly old poem written back in the 50s or something like that. But only my opinion, is a caterpillar ticklish? Well, it's always my belief that he giggles as he wiggles across a hairy leaf. It's supposed to make you laugh, it's supposed to be funny, but the point is that's only her opinion, right? The author of this poem, it's like, hey, that's funny, that's cool to read, but it's almost like she's saying, like, hey, it's just only my opinion. Just because something is your opinion doesn't make it true, and just because you can see in my notes down there, just because you disagree with another person's opinion doesn't make it false. So that's why we want to sort of avoid the whole concept of placing value on opinions. Hey, everyone can have an opinion, and just because you have an opinion doesn't mean that it's good, or just doesn't mean that you're gonna make any like useful changes to people. But it's okay. You can have your opinion about things. You don't have to provide a reason. But if you're asserting your opinion on other people, or if you're projecting on other people and it's just your opinion and you don't have any sort of like logical set of beliefs or to back that up, then it can become divisive, right? That's what leads conversations to becoming divisive, which leads to fighting and bad arguing, and that's not the focus of this class. Okay, focus is on giving reasons. So this chapter talks about a few different models, but the one I'm focusing on the most is the Toulmin model. That's like the classic model of, it's like the textbook model of argument. This is the anatomy of an argument. The authors talk about the Aristotelian approach, the narrative, the pragmadialectics approach as well. Those are all very important. You should still read through those, of course. If you hopefully you've already read them in the chapter. If not, make sure you read them and be familiar with them. But the one I'm focusing on the most is the Toulmin model, because we'll be using that a lot with, as you know, the homework assignment that's due this Sunday, the 21st. The Toulmin model is what you'll be utilizing for a variety of aspects of this class. Skipping ahead, the pragmadialectic approach, that's a big fancy word, pragmadialectic. Think of it as like just in conversation. The nature of argument is understood within the context of a conversation. It's me and you, and we're having coffee, and there's people running around, and there's all these kinds of things going on. So the way to fully understand an argument is more a function of context and our dialectical narrative between the two of us as we're talking. Whereas the Toulmin model is just more like textbook approach. This is an argument. One is not better than the other. They're just different, right? The authors talk about strengths and limitations. And it's good to be aware of all those things. All that to say, there's not one correct way to argue. There's lots of really bad ways to argue, which is probably what you've probably been exposed to the most through media, television, your own personal experience. Why that is, I don't know. It's probably because this course is not taught. This course, in my opinion, could be taught, as early as children, first grade. There we go. Argumentation for first graders. There we go. All right, so slide 5. Sorry, I feel like a sneeze coming on. Slide 5 talks about the first triad. So the first triad of the Toulmin model consists of claim, grounds, and warrant. Now, it almost sounds redundant. Like when you're making a claim must include a claim, the grounds, and the warrant. The whole thing is the claim. So part of the whole claim, according to the Toulmin model, is the conclusion that doesn't stand alone, but requires further proof before the audience is willing to accept it as verified. It's raining outside. I can make a claim. It's raining outside. Grounds, information of fact or opinion used to provide verification of the claim, commonly labeled evidence. It's raining outside, and then you're the audience. You're probably thinking, how does he know that? Well, I say it's raining outside because the ground is wet, right? That's sign reasoning. How do I know that means it's raining? Well, the ground's wet. Maybe I need more information. The ground's wet. People are using umbrellas. The cars are wet. I see water going down the gutter. Okay, those are enough signs to make the conclusion that it's raining outside. It's raining outside, claim, because, and I give all these examples of things that indicate that it's raining. Ground's wet, umbrellas, etc. Those are all part of the grounds. The warrant is the reasoning that justifies the inferential leap from grounds of claim, certifying that given the grounds, the claim is true or probable. Now, a lot of students will struggle with this. They're like, what? They read warrant and they're like, inferential leap from grounds certifying that given the grounds, the claim is true or probable. It sounds so complex, but the authors provide a number of examples that really help to like break this down and to get your mind to be able to wrap around the concept of warrant. One reason why the warrant is sometimes confusing for students is because in conversation, in an argument, we're not explicitly stating the warrant. It's understood. I can assume that if I say it's raining outside because the ground's wet and people are using umbrellas, then the warrant for you is people use umbrellas when it's raining outside. The umbrella is what prevents the rain from getting people wet. People don't like it to get wet. When it rains, all the ground gets wet and it fills up the gutters. And Those are the warrants, right? And I don't have to explain that to you because you already understand that. It's not necessary. Okay, so that's the first triad. Triad is just three. Um, Dyad is two. Triad is three. So here's some examples that the authors provide. Slide 6. Charlotte is an Australian citizen because she was born in Sydney, right? What's the warrant? So I'm gonna challenge you on your own time. What is the warrant? If I had to say to you, if I said to you, explain to me the warrant within that statement. Charlotte is an Australian citizen because she was born in Sydney. Now, hopefully, you'd be able to figure this out. If you scratch your head enough, like, what's the warrant? And you're probably thinking, I don't know, like, well, here's how you would explain it. Well, the reason she's an Australian citizen is because she was born in Sydney. Sydney is in Australia, and if you're born in a city that's part of the country, then your citizenship is in that country, right? Hence, she's an Australian citizen. And we don't talk like that, right? You already know that. If I said Charlotte is an American citizen because she was born in Los Angeles, again, exact same thing. Okay, if you're born in LA, right, that means you're born in California in the United States, which means that the way the world works means you're an American citizen, right? So claim, she's a citizen. Grounds, because she was born in Sydney. Warrant, the places where people are born, whatever respective country that is, makes them a citizen of that country. That's the warrant, right? That's the inferential leap between the two things. Looks like rain, you better take an umbrella. So that's a policy claim. I'm trying to persuade you should take an umbrella. It looks like rain, you should take an umbrella. Why? Well, people use umbrellas to prevent themselves from getting wet. Although, if you live in Baton Rouge, which I did for 5 years, a lot of times it's funny. You'll see people walking around and it's starting to rain, and sometimes we're like, whatever, we're going to get wet no matter what. So in some cities, that wouldn't work. But anyways, just for the sake of this example, that's how it works. I think Nigel got in a fight. He's sporting a black eye. All right. We know that, and I have in my notes here, generally speaking, when you have a warrant, you don't, when it comes to a warrant, you don't have to state it explicitly, assuming that your audience knows that context. But certain audiences might need the clarification. So children might be aware of the obvious connection between focus and automobile accidents. I actually meant to put not. Children might not be aware of the obvious connection between focus and automobile accidents. In other words, I had that claim there. Distracted driving leads to auto accidents because drivers lose focus, right? Most of you probably understand that. In order to operate an automobile, we have to focus. Children might not make that inferential leap between the ground and claims. Like my daughter, who's 6 years old. This morning, as I was driving her to school, she kept asking me questions and kept interrupting me, and I was just saying, hey, I can't turn around unless we're at a red light. She was wanting to show me stuff, and I was trying to get her to understand how I have to focus. She doesn't quite get it. She's 6 years old, right? So for her, the warrant is not explicit. The warrant is not obvious. But for most people, let's say at least people who drive, I don't have to explicitly state the warrant. Some children would. They do get the warrant. And I have that other example. You might say to a child, I think Johnny spilled while drinking his chocolate milk. His shirt has chocolatey brown spots on it. If I said that to my daughter, she gets it. The warrant is and I don't have to explain it to her, and she doesn't have to explain it to herself. She just gets it. She's seen enough spills. She understands the connection between gravity and holding a cup and drinking and spilling and spots, etc. Right? She understands it. She's able to make that inferential leap automatically, more than likely. So hopefully that helps to kind of clarify the relationships among claim, grounds, and warrant. Claim, grounds, and warrant, that's the first triad of the Toulmin model. The other example that further helps you to understand warrant, this is page 44, right out of the textbook. Don't trust Edna because she plays the saxophone. Claim and grounds. Don't trust Edna. I'm telling you not to do something because, and I'm giving you grounds, because she plays the saxophone. So that's reasoning. I'm using reasoning, but it's bad and it doesn't make sense and it's unrelated. So the warrant, there really is no warrant there. All right. But if it said, don't trust Edna because she embezzled millions of dollars from her previous job, now there's the warrant, right? You don't have to explain to me the warrant. I get it. I understand the relationship between trust and embezzling money from a job, right? Those two things are at ends with each other. You can't, if someone embezzles millions of dollars from a job, that's an illegal activity. That's going to compromise their reputation and, of course, the degree to which people are going to trust them. So one way to think about it, and this is my own explanation, a warrant deals with a logical connection between a claim and its conceptually related grounds. So they have to be related. A claim and grounds are always going to be related somehow. So it's a warrant deals with that, right? That's what we're talking about. It's dealing with a logical connection between the claim and the grounds, a relationship. And if you're still struggling, that's okay, because this is a new way. It's like a new vocabulary for you. It's a new language of understanding something that you've always done. Just like anything new, if you take up a new hobby, a new sport, or let's say I like to cook a lot. So if you start cooking, well, you've cooked before, and you've eaten food a lot, and you've seen people cook, but now you're actually learning about it. You're learning how each thing works together. And it takes some time for your brain and body to adjust to that. So if you're grappling with it, if your brain's kind of hurting, you're like, oh, warrant, claim, and leap, and all that kind of stuff, that's good. And if it completely makes sense to you, awesome. Anyhow, moving along. So the second triad, starting on page 44. Now we're dealing with backing, qualifiers, and rebuttals. So something to keep in mind when it comes to backing. Backing is a way to sort of like the authors say backing reinforces the warrant, and so on and so forth. Backing, qualifiers, and rebuttals. They're different ways that they're different tools that you can use to support your argument, to reinforce your argument, to anticipate change, to resistance, etc. So keep in mind, people are predisposed to resist change. As humans, we don't like change, and when it comes to someone's trying to persuade me to do something, to believe something, to begin engaging in a behavior, to cease from engaging in an existing behavior, I'm naturally going to be inclined to resist that. And it's not because I'm stubborn. It's not because I like to fight or argue. It's just like if I'm going to do something, for me personally, if I'm going to do something or believe something, I want to know why. So the more things that you can do to like build, like think of it as like building. These are more tools in your toolbox to help build and construct a very strong argument. Qualifiers. In some cases, sometimes at this point in time, so on and so forth. The qualifiers, it's like you're qualifying your claim. So a qualified claim is, in some cases, smoking cigarettes can be good for you, such as with stress relief. That's a qualified claim. If I just said smoking cigarettes is always bad for your health, that's an unqualified claim. So don't think about qualified and unqualified in the way that we typically understand it. Like, are you qualified for this job? This is a different use of the term qualify. So it can, again, another thing to confuse you, but that's why you're going to college, right? To get a little confused, to get more smart. But that sort of sounds counterproductive, but that's how it works. So in some cases, smoking cigarettes can be good for you, such as with stress relief. Why do we have these types of things like qualifiers? Well, let's just say I'm making a case, right, in a court of law or to a jury or whatever, and I'm saying in all cases, or if I just said like smoking cigarettes is bad for your health. Hey, buddy. Oh, that broke? Okay, that's all right. This little sword. You chewed on it. Yeah, you shouldn't chew on it. That's not good. In most cases, chewing on toy swords is bad for your health. I would agree. Maybe my son would disagree. All that to say, backing up. So if I'm presenting a case and I said smoking cigarettes is always bad for your health, maybe you're thinking of a counter argument. Maybe you found some report you found some scientific journal that shows, hey, there was a study done of people who had very, very high levels of stress, and what they would do is they would smoke one cigarette a night, and when they smoked that cigarette, their blood pressure went down and all these kinds of things happen. And the long-term effect is that, yeah, it was smoking cigarettes wasn't necessarily great for their lung health, but in the long run, it actually helped with, whatever, stress relief or something like that. So that's why I use a qualifier. And the inverse of in some cases, you could say, in most cases, smoking cigarettes is always bad for your health. It's a way to sort of like cover your tracks, so to speak, right? I'm going to make an argument, and then I'm thinking, well, what kinds of things might people challenge me about this? Is there something that someone might bring up that might discount my argument? So before I let someone do that, let's say if I'm debating someone, if it's a formal debate, but in our course we didn't do formal debates, but I'm debating with someone else, arguing with someone else, right? I'm in a legal sort of setting. That's when I use qualifiers, right? I say in most cases, smoking cigarettes is bad for your health, and that way, if you can't bring that up, that whole study that you were going to use in your argument against me, oh, there was a study that showed that people who smoke cigarettes, it was good for them. By saying in most cases smoking cigarettes is bad for your health, now you can't bring that up, right? You could bring it up, and I could say like, okay, cool, but I already said in most cases. So the fact that you bring that up is just, you have to tell the jury like disregard that from your whatever they call that. And rebuttals, they anticipate objections to the claim. It addresses the internal resistance of audience members, kind of similar to qualifiers. So here's one example. Receiving chemotherapy radiation for prostate cancer is the best way to ensure survival because it's created to eliminate the cancer, unless alternative non-invasive treatments secure better outcomes. So a rebuttal is saying like it's saying like the opposite. It's like the counter argument, right? It's another way of anticipating what, let's say you're debating with someone. I'm anticipating like if I'm advocating and pushing for chemotherapy, radiation, and so on and so forth. But I also know that there's other forms that might be better. Like that might be my argument. Or there's a variety of different ways to use a rebuttal to basically strengthen your argument. But that's one example of a rebuttal. The authors provide some as well. And then we got figure 3.4, which is on page 46. So page 46, that heading that says extended Toulmin model, putting it all together. I'd say read through this whole figure where it says you have the context of everything. Police officer pulls someone over because he claims he saw a bag of marijuana on the dashboard, yada yada yada. So you have all the components of Toulmin of the Toulmin model right here. Claim, grounds, warrant. That's all the first triad, and all the components of the second triad. Qualifier, rebuttal, and backing. So this is tying it all together. And then what I have here in the PowerPoint slide on slide 10 is what I did is I basically took everything together and I put it in one very, like 2 long sentences. This is what I might say in the court of law, right? If I was before a judge or a jury, this would be my opening statement. It's just like, hey, textbook approach. Here's the argument. Here's the grounds. Here's the backing. Here's the warrant. I'm including everything within one statement. It doesn't mean that you're gonna convince everyone, but it does mean that you're taking a very strategic approach to persuade someone of something, right? You might need to read through this kind of thing a few times. With figure 3.4 in the textbook, you might need to read through that a few times. I'm emphasizing this because this is tying into the homework that you have for the Sunday. And obviously I talked about the homework assignment within our video announcement, so make sure you've watched the video announcement to understand the homework assignment. And of course, with any theory in any subject in any discipline, there's strengths and limitations. So the authors point out some strength limitations with this. It's an idealized view, right? This is like a textbook approach to arguing, but it can be a bit cumbersome, unwieldy, a bit cumbersome, right? There's so many moving parts and pieces. If we're talking about something, you and I are debating on a topic, and I disagree with you, um, it can be a bit cumbersome to say like, hey, what was your claim and what were your grounds, or you confused the claim and the grounds, or the rebuttal was placed. It can be a little bit confusing. It can take more time and effort, and the way that it's presented is linear, which doesn't account for everyday conversations, everyday encounters. We don't always argue this way, right? And your typical standard conversation with another person, if you're engaging in some kind of an argument, you don't necessarily do it. You don't have a textbook approach like you're playing chess. Like, this is not like chess. Human interactions are not like chess. If they were, then life would be a lot different, right? But it's not like I make a move, hit the timer. Um, Anybody, if any, for any of you who have watched the Queen's Gambit, Queen's Gambit. Hopefully this will bring back some good memories. Great show. I've only watched a couple of them. Anyhow, chess is full on, right? Textbook, right? There's no ways of slipping in an extra move when no one's looking, or extending your time when no one's looking, or making shortcuts or cutting corners. It's like, no, the pawn has a specific range of motion. The knight, the rook, the queen, the king, the bishop, they all have their own functions, and there's really no getting around it, right? That's not how human conversation always works. But nevertheless, it's super good and super important to understand this like detailed explanation of how an argument works, the Toulmin model. So that's that. Along those same lines, the nature of persuasion. We're on to slide 12 in the PowerPoint. So the nature of persuasion happens in degreeness. So right here I have 7 degrees of persuasion, from strongly opposed to strongly in favor, right? This does not represent an exhaustive list of degrees of persuasion. It's not like I'm either strongly opposed, moderately opposed. It's not like you have to choose one of those 7. There could be 17 or 777 degrees of persuasion. But within an argument, within the whole field of persuasion, I bring up persuasion because in argumentation, in terms of an argument, that's ultimately what you're trying to do. You're trying to persuade someone to do something or not to do something. So take any topic that you can think of. Generally, you're gonna consider the topic, and then if I said, hey, where do you fall in terms of persuasion? In terms of being opposed to this thing or being in favor of this thing, where do you fall? It's somewhere between strongly opposed and strongly in favor, somewhere in that range of categories. And the idea, my goal for you, and this is what I sort of preach to all my students when it comes to persuasion, is that the goal is for someone to move just a little bit, just to have some movement, any kind of movement. If you have any kind of movement in one direction or the other direction, I would argue that persuasion has taken place. And if no movement has taken place, then okay, maybe you're just being stubborn. No, I'm kidding. If no movement has taken place, okay, well then you weren't persuaded, right? You might give a speech to me. Maybe you give a talk to me, and you try to persuade me why it's a great idea to go swimming with sharks. And I can tell you right now, more than likely, in all likelihood, right, qualifiers, in all likelihood, I will never do that. I will never swim with sharks, ever. I don't ever see myself doing that. I could easily say I'm strongly opposed. But you might give a speech, you might give a whole talk of interviews and all these reasons, really good reasons, why I should be okay with it, why I should consider it, and maybe dip my toes in the water one day. Listening to your speech, I might go from strongly opposed to less opposed, to moderately opposed, or somewhere between moderately and strongly. But the point is, if I go a little bit, if I move just a little bit on the spectrum of persuasion, then I could say, yeah, that was persuasive. I'm not going to go do that thing now, but it was still persuasive, and you sort of moved me a little bit. All that to say, I don't have to get someone to exactly agree with me in order for me to have been persuasive, in order for my argument to have been persuasive and to have been strong. You don't have to agree with it, but just because you don't agree with it doesn't mean that it wasn't a good argument. Doesn't mean, like, for certain issues, I might know that I'm right, and it's not that I have so much confidence in myself. I just, like, I know that I'm right because I've done the research. I have all the evidence. You know what I mean? Like, all the evidence. There's a preponderance of evidence in my favor, and for some reason you don't agree with it. It's like, well, I can't force you to agree with it, but that doesn't mean that I wasn't persuasive. It's just that you weren't persuaded. It's one way to think about persuasion. Okay, so that is the Toulmin model. Hopefully that clarified what you already read. Again, the whole format for these PowerPoint lectures and videos is that you've already read the chapter in detail, very thoroughly, and then you look through the PowerPoint, listen to the video, and that enhances your understanding. And if you're still grappling with it, if you're still struggling with it, because this is challenging stuff, argumentation, read the chapter again, review the chapter. If you look at the references the authors provide, they provide all these references, and if you see the references, it says Hitchcock and Verhage 2005, and you're like, that sounds like an interesting article. You can look at the back of the chapter. The back of the chapter has these references. For those of you who really want to go above and beyond, if you really want to understand a really thorough context of what the authors are talking about, you can always look at their references and look that up to have more context. That requires extra work. You can Google, you can just type in, search the Toulmin model. You'll learn a lot about that. And I want to move on to this next part on slide 13. It says surviving and thriving. This is something that I talk about in all my classes, but especially with communication classes where we're talking about the nature of self and identity and self-concept, self-esteem, self-complexity, all these types of things. They're all tied into who we are as a human being. And these are all relevant because the way that we argue or the way that we fail to argue, passive aggressiveness, toxic forms of argumentation, those are all tied in on some level. They're all tied into what's going on here and what's in here. So there's a lot of interesting research on this topic called self-complexity. So self-complexity refers to the number of self-aspects that we have. When you think of self-aspects, think of like the hats that you wear. You're a student, a friend, a brother, a dad, maybe a volunteer on some level, right? All those different roles that you serve represents a different aspect of yourself. Generally, the way that you communicate, the way that you are at your place of work versus with your friends versus with your family versus when you're a babysitter versus all the different things that you do, you're a little different, right? You're still the same person. You're still you, but different levels and different there's different levels of who you are. There's different levels of your personality that are manifested in unique ways as a function of that self aspect. So different elements of my personality are manifested in one way when I'm volunteering my time at church versus when I'm a stranger at a grocery store having small talk with another stranger versus when I'm with my nieces and nephews, right? I act differently, and rightly so. So here's what the research has found on self-complexity. People with high self-complexity cope better with the trauma from negative life events compared to those with low self-complexity. So anytime you have a negative life event, there's trauma that's associated with it. So these are maybe big words, but they're very, very broad, general terms. So think about a negative life event. Oh my gosh, a negative life event. Someone cuts you off, as you're driving. You get a bad grade on an exam. You spill water on your shoes. You lose your scholarship, right? A negative life event in terms of severity could range from 1 to 1,000. So whatever negative life event you experience, it's going to have some level of severity, right? The more severe, then the harder it is to deal with. The less severe, the easier it is to deal with. But that's beside the point. What the research has found is that people who have a high level of self-complexity, they're involved in a lot of different areas. They do a better job of coping with the negative parts of life compared to people with low self-complexity. So basically it means being engaged is good. But there are caveats. There are certainly caveats with having too many self aspects. So what do you think? So, pause for a second. What do you think would be some of the caveats, the dangers, the risks associated with having too many self aspects? You're an excessive number. You're involved in too many things. You're overcommitting yourself. So what are those risks? So pause. Hit the pause. Think about it. Maybe that's you. Well, what happens is you become a jack of all trades, master of none, right? You're spreading yourself too thin. All these expressions and metaphors and whatnot. When you're trying to do too many things at the same time, eventually something's going to give. When you're juggling, 50 plates, you're a juggler. You've seen those people who juggle plates and stuff. At some point, when you're juggling too many things, some are going to drop. At some point, there's a threshold. So same thing with like you're in too many friend groups. You're overcommitted in too many different areas of your life. At some point, something's going to give. That's less common, right? Some people are like that, but anyhow, why is that? Why is this important? Like, how does this all work? If you have a very low self complexity, let's say your entire life is your job, and you work 120 hours a week. You live, eat, sleep, and work your job. That's all that you do. It's just all like one job, one career, one thing, and you're not involved in any other aspects of life. Well, if you lose that job, it's like you got nothing else. You have no other communities and networks that are going to help you cope with that. Not to say that you can't have a job and a busy job and have a lot of networks, but that's kind of how it works. Is like it's good to have a diversity of different social networks to expand your self complexity. And that way, if let's say you're an athlete, and which happens a lot. One thing that happens a lot: you're an athlete, you have an injury, and you can no longer play that sport. Well, now what do you do? If that was your whole life, and now you can't play, well, now what do you do? But let's say you're an athlete, but you were also involved in all these other things. Well, now you have all these social support groups you have a diversity of social support groups that are going to help you move through that. So that's a long explanation of why people with high self-complexity do a better job of coping with the trauma from experiencing some sort of negative life event. Self-fulfilling prophecy is something that's also very important. You probably heard this term before. Here's a 4-stage approach to explaining self-fulfilling prophecy, which is essentially if you believe something's going to happen, it's going to happen. If you believe something won't happen, it probably won't happen. That's sort of one way to explain self-fulfilling prophecy. But according to a variety of textbooks that I've used, this is the 4-stage approach. You hold an expectation, you behave accordingly, the expectation comes to pass, and there's a reinforcement of the original expectation. And so if you're thinking on the negative, if you're thinking, I'm going to fail. I'm going to fail this exam. I'm going to fail this exam. Like that's your expectation. It's a negative expectation, negative self-talk. Behaving accordingly. What does it mean to behave according to that expectation? The behaviors that you'd be engaging in would be things that are the opposite of what you need to do to get a good grade. So instead of studying at different chunks of studying for various amounts of time at different chunks of the day, or different times of the day, you'd be doing other things, watching TV. You behave accordingly. You continue having that negative self-talk. What's the point of studying? I'm going to fail anyways. I should study tonight, but you know what? I could catch up on doing laundry. I could study tomorrow night, but you know what? I'm gonna pick up that shift for my friend at work. So you start exhibiting behaviors that are consistent with that expectation, right? Because if you're gonna fail, then the behaviors that are consistent with failing are not studying, and then doing other things that are in lieu of studying. And of course, the negative self-talk. The expectation comes to pass, right? You take the exam, you get the bad grade, and then there's a reinforcement of the original expectation. You see, I knew I would fail, right? The inverse of that can also be true, right? The positive side of self-fulfilling prophecy, and that's what I want you to focus on as much as possible. Try to focus on the positives. You hold an expectation. Maybe historically you get really low grades on exams. You're not a good exam test taker, or you're not good at taking tests, and so on and so forth. So now you're going to help hold a positive expectation. Don't say I'm gonna get an A plus. I'm gonna ace it. I'm not gonna get any wrong. Well, I don't know. That's a high expectation. But one expectation that's realistic would be I'm gonna study in a way I've never studied before. I'm gonna study for at least 30 hours for this exam, or 20 hours, or 50 hours, whatever the exam is, right? Would warrant different levels of studying. So you hold the expectation. I'm gonna score higher in this exam than I ever have before. You behave accordingly. What's behaving accordingly? You get in a study group. You carve out chunks of time for studying. You make note cards. These are all behaviors that are consistent with that expectation, perhaps something you haven't done in the past. You take the exam, the expectation comes to pass. You get your grade back on the exam, and you're like, B plus. I've never had a B plus in my life. Reinforcement of the original expectation. You see, I knew that studying would pay off, right? So that's how that works. So on to that next slide, the Sisyphean struggle. Another thing that I remind students of, just when it comes to the nature of getting through life and getting through challenges and whatnot. The Sisyphean struggle of dealing with the Greek mythology of Sisyphus, and I don't know Greek mythology very well, but apparently the story of Sisyphus is he did something wrong, and his punishment for the rest of his life was that he had to roll this great big boulder up to the top of a hill. And when he got down to the top, when he got to the top, he had to let the boulder roll back down to the bottom, and he'd go back down to the bottom and roll it back up, and so on and so forth. That was his lifelong punishment. And so what some people would say is like that concept of a Sisyphean struggle is analogous to what we might experience in human life, right? In the real world, with, let's say, doing dishes, right? You have a kitchen full of all these dirty dishes everywhere, and then as soon as you clean it up, it's like you blink, and then boom, the kitchen's all dirty again. Or it's your bedroom, and it's cleaned up your bedroom, or your place of employment, whatever the case may be, or studying or doing work in college, and all those types of things. Like, you work so hard to get something accomplished, and then as soon as you accomplish it, you kind of like look back, it's like you look, and now the ball's rolling back down the hill again, right? The boulder, the proverbial boulder is rolling back down the hill, and it can feel very, very discouraging. But the difference is the story of Sisyphus, it's Greek mythology, right? That didn't really happen. But in real life, we can learn to push through these things and learn best practices, learn how to cope with things better. And so there's a video I really, really like to show my students. I've seen it myself so many times. It's on the next slide 16. This is about thriving. Like, how do we thrive? How do you like get through those treacherous, challenging times? You have to learn to love the learning, which sounds very strange, but that's what you have to do. Figure out how to enjoy the learning process, because what you're actually experiencing might not be enjoyable, right? Whatever it is, think of like a sports story or a sports movie, or some sort of movie where it shows the central character going through this process of learning, where it's like painstaking, and they're going through all these moments of growth, and it's challenging, and it's frustrating, and highs and lows. It's not that you love those things. You don't love those individual experiences per se, but the overall process of learning, right? When you come out of it all, that's what you learn to love. Change your thoughts to change your circumstances, right? You might not have control over your circumstances, but you do have a degree of control over your thoughts. Easier said than done. Expect challenges, right? Whatever your big challenge, whatever your big thing is that you're thriving and working through, it's good. There are going to be challenges. And then one thing that's helpful is to think about people who have done great things beyond human comprehension, like inventions and feats that people have done in their lives. You can click on that YouTube link if you're looking at the PowerPoint in slideshow presentation show or whatever. You can just click on the link, or just I think control left click that link. Really cool motivational video, a very inspiring video. It's only a few minutes long, like three or 4 minutes long, It's a story about Kerwin Ray. He's a Australian guy. He's has an awesome story. So please watch the video. It's super cool, super inspiring, and hopefully that will make you feel better about yourself, inspire you to do something. And this last slide with self-fulfilling prophecy. This is another one of those things that is for your own benefit, for your own growth. I'm not gonna, I'm not requiring you to do this, but I highly recommend that you spend a few minutes and recall a recent self-fulfilling prophecy of your own related to persisting in college or your job or a sport you played. And just spend a few minutes answering the questions in your notes. You can do it in your head if you don't feel like writing down. Do it in your head. It's good to reflect. It's good to have introspections, but I recommend writing things down. Pencil and paper, maybe in your textbook, typing it in the notes in here, or if you're with someone, you can talk about this with someone. It's another one of those things that can help you take your mind off of everything else. So what was the self-fulfilling prophecy? It might be negative, it might be positive. So this is another way of understanding, of gaining perspective on things you've done in the past and how that affected you and how you got there and how you can learn from that. If they're positive things, great. Capitalize on the positive things and keep building. If they're negative things, well, don't be too harsh on yourself and you don't have to punish yourself, but like recognize it, own it, and figure out how to move forward, how to like move on from that point of negativity. And oftentimes things are out of your control. So what can you do, right? What can you do to improve? Okay, so that was Chapter 3 on the Toulmin model and the nature of arguments, and of course stuff on persisting and thriving in college. Hope you're all doing great, and I will talk to you later. Bye.